Part 6, The Greed of Capitalism. From our last video, we learned that the work shift is not a fixed length. It can be of 8 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours, and so on. But it must certainly come to an end. The human being has physiological, social, and intellectual needs that he must satisfy. The capitalist encounters a max limit, that is more or less approximating 24 hours. Still, the capitalist is still a capitalist, and we've established the fact that his profit is determined by the difference between the total value that the labor creates through his labor and the wage that he pays him. Basically, increase the labor's work shift and you increase profit. Hence, his primal instinct is to maximize the length of the work shift, to squeeze out the most out of the commodity labor power that he bought. To quote Marx, capital is dead labor. That, vampire-like, only lives by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. The time during which the labor works is the time during which the capitalist consumes the labor power he has purchased of him. This is the spirit, the greed of capital. At this point, Marx goes on an angry rant listing real-world examples to illustrate this blood-sucking quality of capitalism. Let's travel back to Great Britain in the 19th century. In 1850, British Parliament instituted the Factory Acts, which allowed for the average workday not to exceed 10 hours, excluding a half hour for breakfast and hour for dinner. Inspectors that were sent to report on the status of the factories found that the capitalist owners were using creative ways to circumvent the 10-hour limit. For example, it was common for factory owners to start the workday 15 minutes before the official start to the workday and end it 15 minutes after the official workday has finished. So this is 30 minutes in total added to the work shift that the labor does not get paid for. The capitalists gave the pretext that they need this time before to prepare the machines to get them ready for the work shift, and they need the time after to clean the machines when the work shift has ended. Okay, that's fine, but if these actions are absolutely necessary for production, then why not pay the laborers for this? These additional unpaid 30 minutes that the owners tack on to the work shift might not seem like a big deal, right? I mean, what is 30 minutes? But remember that this is added every single day. And if a worker is working 6 days a week, as was standard at the time, at the end of the year, this will amount to 0.5 hours times 6 times 52 weeks to equal 156 hours, or 15.6 entire work shifts that the capitalist steals from just one labor. We can easily see that these small thefts, these snatchings of a few minutes, have a big impact in the long run. And the really messed up part about this is that the capitalists that were caught doing this actually got fined. There was consequences for doing this, but they calculated that the profit that was gained from stealing time from the laborers and getting fined every once in a while was greater than if they actually followed the law, didn't steal from the laborers, and didn't get fined. Isn't that disgusting? Well, this was a long time ago. Times have changed. Things like this just don't happen to laborers anymore. You're absolutely mistaken. This still happens. Wage theft is basically the business model of large corporations like Walmart in the United States. For example, and this isn't exactly from Capital, but I think it's important to explain that these ideas are as relevant and modern as ever. In the United States, the work week consists of 40 hours. Anything that is worked over this, you get paid overtime, usually time and a half. Okay, this is good. However, it might happen that your boss tells you, you cannot work overtime, do not record more than 40 hours on your timesheet, but you cannot leave until you finish your work. This is confusing, right? If you have to go over your regular hours to finish your work because it's really busy at that time or something, it makes sense to record the exact time that you actually leave. What your boss is implying, without actually having to face the possible repercussions of telling you directly, is to work off the clock, to not record the overtime that you worked, to basically work for free. Another common way that modern capitalists steal labor time from the labor is by not giving them their time for lunch and breaks. In California, if you work 8 hours or more, you are by law given 30 minutes of a lunch break. It might so happen that a work environment is so understaffed, so undermanned, that workers just do not have the time to take their hour or half-hour breaks that they are legally required to take. Okay, that's fine. If this happens, they can just add this time as overtime to their timesheet, right? Oh no, just like before, your boss does not allow overtime, so he records your timesheet as if you had actually taken your break. This happens way more than you might think, and it is absolutely terrible. It's just the most naked representation of Marx's idea of the extraction of surplus labor possible. And just like in our 1800s example, there are consequences for capitalists doing this. Walmart is up to its ass in lawsuits over just this. but it turns out that it is more profitable to keep doing these practices and face lawsuits than to actually pay the workers the time that they worked. There was also a time when certain industries did not have a legal limit to the work shift. For instance, in the Milliner Industry, as in the making of women's hats. I don't know. I will quote Marx. In the last week of June 1863, all the London daily papers published a paragraph with the sensational heading, "Death from Simple Overwork." It dealt with the death of the milliner, Mary Ann Walkley, 20 years of age, employed in a highly respectable dressmaking establishment, exploited by a lady with the pleasant name of Elise. The old often told story was once more recounted. This girl worked on an average 16 and a half hours, and during the season often 30 hours, without a break, while her failing labor power was revived by occasional supplies of sherry, port, or coffee. Mary Ann Walkley had worked without intermission for 26 and a half hours, with 60 other girls, 30 in one room that only afforded 1/3 of the cubic feet of air required for them. At night, they slept in pairs in one of the stifling holes into which the bedroom was divided by partitions of board. And this was one of the best millinery establishments in London. Mary Ann Walkley fell ill on the Friday, died on Sunday, without, to the astonishment of Madame Elise, having previously completed the work in hand. The doctor, Mr. Keyes, called too late to the deathbed, duly bore witness before the coroner's jury that Mary Ann Walkley had died from long hours of work in an overcrowded workroom and a too small and badly ventilated bedroom. The deceased had died of apoplexy, but there was reason to fear that her death had been accelerated by overwork in an overcrowded workroom. Death by overwork was disturbingly common in those times. If you make your workers work 24 hours or more, they won't have time to satisfy their bodily needs, so they would die. So this is exactly what happened if they were not required by law to limit the work shift. You would think that the capitalists would treat their workers better. You would think that it is in the capitalists' best interest to give them an adequate work environment. Give them enough space, enough breathing room so that they can perform their work without any discomfort, and give them an adequate work shift length so that they have enough time to rest, to recuperate their strength. A healthy worker is, after all, gonna perform better than a malnourished, sleep-deprived, ill worker. But it turns out, especially in those times, that labor power was so cheap, it was so plentiful, that it's actually more cost-effective to squeeze out the worker for everything he has, extend their work shift to an unhealthy length, and have him die before the age of 40, because you can just replace him with another poor sod in the blink of an eye. Another example is the relay system. In certain branches of industries back in Marx's time, the never-ending bloodlust of capital to consume labor led them to extend the time that the factories were active to 24 hours a day. Now, of course, you cannot make a single worker work 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. This is impossible. So to remedy this, they implemented a system of relays, in which a portion of the workers would work the day shift, and then a second set would take over for the entire night. That way the factories are always running. Okay, this doesn't sound too bad, right? A worker only works one shift, either night or day. Well, not exactly. It might so happen that the worker that was supposed to take over for the current one doesn't show up. Perhaps he got sick, perhaps there was an emergency, or perhaps he just didn't feel like coming to work that day. Which, by the way, is a perfectly good reason to not want to go to work. Well, now the worker that just finished his shift has to take over for the guy that didn't show up, and now he has to work 2 shifts without stopping. 24 hours of non-stop work. The workers under the system, more often than not literal children, like straight-up 9-year-olds, sometimes have to take over 3 shifts in total, making them work non-stop for 36 hours. Have I mentioned that child labor was not only common in those times, but pretty much the whole basis of entire industrial sectors? I think I should have mentioned that sooner. Marx talks about the exploitation of children under capitalism extensively throughout his work. Capitalism is all about maximizing gains and reducing costs to the bare minimum, without any regard to the health of the workers. Remember, to the capitalist, the worker is just a commodity. Of course, they're only going to hire just enough workers to able to do the job and extract as much labor from them possible. So if one of them is unable to show up, the others have to cover his shift. This is as common as ever. I mean, sure, it doesn't really happen to children, at least not in the developed world. In businesses where they have to operate 24 hours per day, like some restaurants, retailers, you have the exact same situation. Someone from the next shift calls out, so now your manager tells you you have to cover them. And even if the person that called out had a perfectly good reason to not go to work, maybe a family member was in an accident, or who knows, things just happen, the toxic work environment will make them feel bad for calling out. The manager will hold a grudge on that worker for making the business and his co-workers suffer. These are only a few examples of the dozens that Marx shows to illustrate the spirit of capitalism, its never-ending thirst to suck out the energy of its laborers. In the next video we will return to a bit more theory, most likely about the creation of relative surplus. And yes, it's going to be a boring one. This one was supposed to be one of my exciting ones if you didn't notice. Anyway, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Goodbye.